we picked this spot specifically because this is where the largest Ohlone shell mound, and you'll learn lots more about this, but this is where the largest of the, I think, 33 shell mounds around the Bay Area was, and well, parts of it still are. And so it felt like, and there was a huge Ohlone village on this creek, and it felt like a really important place to begin our stories of the watersheds of the East Bay. So with that in mind, I just want to start, oh, and I'm going to try not to cry. I just want to start by thanking the Wuchin Ohlone, who were the people who lived here for at least 2,400 years when Spanish settlers showed up in 1776, the Spanish missionaries. So I want to say thank you to the Ohlone and to the ancestors who are not my ancestors, but nonetheless, as I stand here today, those are the people whose shoulders I'm standing on. And I want to thank you for being the people here who took care of these lands and managed them so well for the ecosystem of that time. I actually brought a little bit of Mclaughlin River water, which is the river I'm made of, to pour in, but like most rivers, it had its own ideas and it poured itself out on the way here. So with that, I'm just going to say thank you again to the Ohlone, and we hope that we can honor you well through these watershed walks. So with that, I think we're, and also, I'm sorry, I wanted to thank our partners, the Greenbelt Alliance. Zoe is the person who's the at-home manager for this meeting. Thank the East Bay Regional Park District for lending us a naturalist, and for Watershed Witness Tours, Joshua Halpern, for showing up also, is a super knowledgeable person for this tour. So thank you. Joshua, I think you're the first one, is that true?
No, I think it's Constance, actually.
Okay, Constance, go for it.
All right. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Thumbs up. All right. My name is Constance Taylor. I am a naturalist with the East Bay Regional Parks, and we are here at the Emeryville Crescent. So I'm going to flip my screen real quick and do a quick pan. So this is part of the Mclaughlin Shoreline State Park. And this is one of the 72 parks that East Bay Regional Parks manages. It is a state park, but we are the ones responsible for stewarding it as far as that's concerned. And we are standing right at the point where the Temazcal Creek drains into the bay. So I know that Elizabeth probably showed that to you. Sorry, I can't see all of the, different screens on my phone. So right here is where the Temazcal Creek drains out into the bay. So this is a really special area. It is a wetland habitat. There are a lot of birds who nest here, lots of birds who migrate through this area. And this is actually not an area that is open to the general public because it is protected habitat. But we have permission to be out here today because so many people are curious about this area. The public is allowed here during volunteer trash cleanup days. There were a couple scheduled for this time of year, but obviously those are not happening right now. So hopefully they will start up again in fall. So keep an eye out for different volunteer opportunities, and you can come on out here and check it out. So we're covering a lot of ground today. In an hour, we're going to travel through about 15,000 years of the history of the watershed that we're in, and all the different ways people have lived with and influenced the area, or rather some of the different ways, not all. So watershed is the word of the day. This is the word that kind of encompasses all kinds of different things in the ecology. If you're unfamiliar with that term, essentially it just means an area of land where the water drains to one spot. So that could be a pond, it could be a creek, it could be a lake, it could be a bay like the San Francisco Bay. And the specific watershed that we are in is the one that Temazcal Creek drains. And Zoe, could you please bring up the picture of the Temazcal Creek watershed?
Yes, one moment.
Great, thank you. So when it comes up, this is the outline of the watershed, and it drains about 6.7 square miles directly to where we're standing. And watersheds are nested. There can be a lot of smaller watersheds within a larger watershed. And so the big watershed that encompasses Temescal Creek is the San Francisco Bay Watershed. So the Bay Area, and you can switch it back, Zoe, thank you. And so the area that drains to the bay is 75,000 square miles. So it's quite a lot of land. So when we're at the bay, we are directly connected to a much larger area than we usually think about. So when we learn about a watershed, what we're actually learning about is the life of the land, and not just the past story, but also how these things connect to the present and how they're going to influence each other in the future. So where we are here, sorry, let me fiddle with this so I can see what you are all seeing. My apologies. I can see Zoe very nicely, but I can't see what you're all seeing.
Hey, Constance, I'm just going to throw in that the San Francisco Bay drains about 40% of the state of California. It's also the largest estuary on the western coast of both North, Central, and South America. It's one of the four top most important estuaries in the world, and is like the keystone of the Pacific Flyway. And then this creek in particular, just Temazcal Creek, drains 6 square miles total, and then 2.5 of it's above Lake Temescal, and the rest of it's below. That's it. Just wanted to throw that in there.
Constance, I believe you're muted.
Oh, unmuted. Thank you for doing that. All right. Okay, can you hear me now? We're good? Okay.
Yep, we're good.
So the present bay waters as they are only about 10,000 years old. So this is essentially a flooded valley that we're standing right next to. And it's valleyed out because it's right by the San Andreas and Hayward faults. And there's essentially a block of land that dropped out. And so it's thought the valley was flooded for the first time about 1 million years ago, and the water has come and gone several times since then. So just to kind of rein in the scope a little, I'm just going to talk about the bay as it's been since the Pleistocene, which was the last ice age. And that was about 2.6 million years ago to 11,000 years ago. And during this time, we had glaciers covering huge areas of land, and the oceans as we know it were about 400 feet lower than they are now. So imagine going back in time in our time machines, and right in front of us where all this water is was a grassy valley with a river running directly through it, coming from the Central Valley through the Carquinez Strait and then out to the Pacific. And the origin of this river was Lake Corcoran, which was the giant inland lake that covered the Central Valley. And now 2 major freshwater sources into the bay are the Sacramento and San Joaquin rivers. So during the Pleistocene, the bay would have looked a lot different, not only because it wouldn't have been filled with water, but because there would have been amazing giant mammals roaming around. So I was kind of standing out here today, imagining, I don't know if you can see those freighters out there. I'm assuming that's what they are. I was imagining them as giant mastodons roaming the valley, even though the valley would have been a little bit lower. And this was essentially the California Serengeti. Oh, what was the name of the old lake? Lake Corcoran, C-O-R-C-O-R-A-N. And there was a massive diversity of megafauna out here roaming the grasslands. We would have had llamas and camels and saber-toothed cats, American lions, which were about 25% larger than their African counterparts, American cheetah, which would have been chasing the pronghorn antelope herds around here. There would have been dire wolves, and oh, thank you for that. There would have been dire wolves and 3 types of bear, the short-faced bear, the grizzly bear, and the black bear. as well as 2 different types of giant ground sloths. So it's pretty incredible, not to mention the animals who we still have with us today from that time, like deer and coyote and mountain lions. So during this time, you could walk all the way out to the Farallones because the coast was 19 miles west of San Francisco. And Zoe, if you could show the Bay Area coastline from 14,000 years ago.
I'm taking the dogs.
So that would have been quite a sight. There we go, thank you. And so in the bay, it's relatively shallow. It's really thought to only be, it's not considered to be that deep. The deepest parts are in the Central Bay between San Francisco, Marin, and Angel Island. And Joshua shared a picture with me of the Golden Gate seafloor. If you could show that, Zoe, that would be awesome. And there is a theory that underneath the Golden Gate, because there is a steep drop-off, that purple area right underneath the Golden Gate, there's a steep drop-off of well over 100 feet. It's thought that there could have been a waterfall right underneath where the Golden Gate Bridge is now from the river. And so when you see all these giant freighters coming through here, it's because there have been dredge channels to make it deeper for these ships to come through. So we've got the glaciers melting around 18,000 years ago, and water starts coming inland slowly. And then about 15 to 10,000 years ago is when we get the bay as we know it. Oh no, my battery's already low. Well, I will pass it along to Josh because less than a quarter mile from this outflow is the site of one of the largest and oldest shell mounds in the area. And right around the time when the bay was formed was, according to Western archaeology, is when people started living here. So Josh, you can take it away and tell us a little more about the Shell Mound and who made it.
Thank you, Constance. That was fantastic, and I'm grateful to be with all of you, and I'm honored to be at this place that's so sacred to so many people for so many thousands of years. Y'all can hear me okay? Okay.
Yes.
So I wanted to start with some of the creation myths and accounts of the Ohlone and the various tribes here, because it sort of coincides with some of the scientific data that we were just talking about, where a lot of these tribes, you know, they have different all creation myths that arise, but they also have certain things in common. One of those is that all the land was underwater before there were humans. And the only bit of land that stuck up above the water was the tip of Mount Diablo. And at the tip of Mount Diablo, there was the first being who was a coyote. And that coyote has different names depending on which tribe you're from. Oyete, for if you lived out in Temazcal Bay, and Hueles, if you lived out here. But the story basically goes that in order to get the waters to go down and for the first people to arrive, the coyote talked to his grandson, the falcon. There's some, you know, sometimes it's a hummingbird, sometimes it's an eagle. The falcon seems to be pretty consistent. And the falcon flies over the land, and as the waters drops feathers in each place that the humans are going to come in each village where the humans are born. And as far as we can tell, humans first stepped foot in California about 13,000 years ago, which is before the Ice Age receded. So that would still have been when the Bay Area was a big valley, because the ice started to recede about 11,000 years ago. And in 1909, there was a survey conducted by oh, thank you, Zoe. Yeah, there was that's Wek Wek, the falcon, and the coyote creation, coyote creator. So in 1909, the only sort of major survey of the shell mounds occurred. It was a Cal grad student, and he counted 425 shell mounds all around the bay. Zoe, there's probably a map that's next on that. So you have to imagine, right now we look across the bay and we see all the buildings, all the skyscrapers and the skyline. But during that time, you would have been able to look across the bay and seen this undulating shoreline with all of these different mounds, some of them huge, some of them medium, some of them with ceremonial fires on top, some of them with fires that indicated that there were trades that wanted to happen. And village life centered around what was, for all intents and purposes, a sacred compost pile. The majority of these shell mounds were shells, were mollusks and oysters and mussels and all the abundance that the Constance will talk about shortly. But a lot of them also, it wasn't just the accumulated meals that sustained your families over generations and generations that accumulated in these village sites. It was also the actual bodies of your ancestors that went into these ceremonial piles. So it was a symbol of how long you had been there on the land, how much the land had been able to sustain you, and also a sacred lived relationship with the ancestors who had passed on. So let's see, I have a couple notes which I will refer to. There were willow and two reed houses, all taking place on the there you go, yeah, all taking place on the mound. They were such a center of village life that they believed that there wasn't even time for grasses to really grow on the mound. The reason that willow branches were really good for building the houses was because they grew in bunches along these creeks. And you can cut a willow branch and stick it in the ground and it'll grow into a huge tree. You also, the bark, when you cut a willow branch, it smells like aspirin, and that's because there's pain relieving qualities to willow branches. But there were ceremonial roundhouses that were usually at the top of the hill. And they were oriented towards that sacred, out this way, out towards the Golden Gate Bridge. Not currently, didn't have a bridge at that point. But the funeral rites lasted about 4 days because that was the time that it took a soul to I'm hearing a little bit of sound. We might want to mute other people. That was the time it took a soul to pause on Alcatraz Island and then head through that western gate. There were huge baskets on stilts that held the acorn harvest. There were generations of communal fires and like I said, fires for communicating with tribes on the opposite shores. There were cooking pits for roasting roots and meats, and the name of Temazcal is derived from the Aztec word Temescali, which refers to sweat lodges that existed up further along the creek. This shell mound, I'll just give you a few more shell mound notes and then we'll go back to Constance. Wasn't this high. This is a teeny approximation of what the shell mound looked like. It was actually, let's see if I can get an angle on that. That's the top of the P.F. Chang's. It was actually that high. It was about 5 stories, 66 feet is what they believe. Now, this one was one of the largest. And what does that mean if it's the largest? Well, it means it was probably one of the oldest. It was accumulating generations and generations and millennia of human prayer and existence in this place. It was 66 feet high, 350 feet wide. It extended into the bay waters, which were a lot marshier at the time, obviously, not a lot of cement. And I'll show you, I don't know if I've shown you officially, but this is the creek we're talking about right here. There's a little mallard. And I tried to get some images of the baby duckies that swam by earlier. But one of the things you can't tell about this creek right now is the smell. There's sort of a musky dankness, and that's partly because it's a cement channel. There's not the soft edge spaces where diversity can grow. So yeah, there were, aside from this large mound here. There were 4 smaller shell mounds surrounding it, and of 500 tribes around the bay, the Temescal Creek marked the southern border of the Quichun territory, which was one of the larger village complexes, and it stretched out to Richmond. Willow groves, I mentioned those. They moved seasonally into the hills to collect acorns, and they vied for a lot of the fish in the water or whale if it beached with the grizzlies, who obviously they revered and respected. And then also they used controlled burns. One of the things that came up over these last few wildfire seasons is how differently the indigenous communities were able to tend these landscapes that are supposed to burn, but doing it in a conscious way. They also use pruning and transplanting and other food forest techniques to steward the landscape over centuries. So Constance, I'm gonna send it back to you. I guess the next question is, what made this spot so abundant that it was the perfect place to sustain such a large village for so many millennia?
That is a great question. And the answer could really be summed up with the word biodiversity. Where we are right now is a tidal mudflat and estuary. And an estuary is an area where fresh and salt water meet. And there's often a huge diversity of plant and animal life because we are at a place called an ecotone, which is just a word that means where different biological areas meet. So ecotones between habitats are often a lot richer in species than one or another habitat by itself. And so here we are, we've got the freshwater meeting the saltwater, we've got solid land meeting the mudflats. And a mudflat is really just a specific type of wetland. They can also be called tidal flats. It's just where coastal wetlands that form in these intertidal areas and sediments get deposited by tides and rivers. So if you can see, there's just lots and lots of mud out here, which is great because this is fantastic habitat for lots of little invertebrates like mussel and oysters. And before we radically changed the shoreline so much, there also were massive eel grass beds, which were huge, or hugely important in sustaining diversity. And Zoe, if you could go ahead and show that eelgrass picture. So eelgrass is essentially a type of plant, you know, it's a type of seaweed, and it's got these long fronds, and it's a really important plant for a lot of different animals. Lots of fish will lay their eggs in these eelgrass beds. Baby mussels will attach themselves to the eelgrass fronds. And so it's one of the areas that, I'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's becoming more and more important as we are trying to conserve different types of habitat around the bay. And so eelgrass is also really important for microinvertebrate life, which in turn sustains the fish around here, which in turn sustain all the birds around here. And so it would have been extraordinarily abundant in terms of food for people. There's shellfish, there's fish, there's birds. And that's not even to mention the food on land as well, which would have included things like acorns and berries, grassy seeds and flower seeds, and also lots and lots of game.
Can I just add one little thing in
please.
here, which is that it used to have, we used to have here like delta smelt, which are, if you've been involved at all in delta politics in the last 25, 30 years, you know about the delta smelt, tiny little fish that has been kind of the one of the basis for life here in the bay. And they used to have such big runs that they would last for the Ohlone would cull them for 21 days. And Zoe, I wonder if you could put up a picture of the wetlands as they used to be here around the bay, so we can see. And Constance, are you going to talk about this, the loss of wetlands?
A little bit, but go for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a picture, Zoe, that says like former wetlands bay.
Got it.
Okay, so you can see it, like we've only got about maybe at the most, I'd say 10% of the original marshes and mud flats that were here. And so I read something this morning that they used to do duck hunting right where we are and all along the shoreline because there were hundreds of thousands of ducks here during duck season. You can see now, you know, there's nothing like that anymore. So it's just really important to keep, as we're talking about these marshes and the salt flats and the eelgrass, these are actually like crucial elements of the bay ecosystem that we've almost annihilated. And so places like Point Melody, where there's one of the largest eelgrass beds left in Northern California, and they're trying to do development there. That's why we're fighting so hard against that development, is because there's so little left and we need it to repopulate as we continue restoring the Bay Area. Okay, thanks a lot for letting me interrupt.
Of course. And I believe Josh was going to talk a little bit more about history and bringing us up to present day.
Sure, is it my time to do that?
It is, yes.
Okay, while I do that, I will walk through, let me switch the camera. So this is the little Shell Mound Memorial, and they also have this walkthrough. I guess I'm gonna go do it backwards, but that's fine, because we are in the current day. So this section gets a little grim, of course, because we're talking about our history with the indigenous cultures here. It appears this Shell Mound was abandoned 400 years ago. They're not entirely sure why. There was speculation at the time that it was about grizzlies and the enormous amount of grizzlies that congregated here, but it's likely that there were intertribal reasons. The last known grizzly sighting was hunted in Berkeley in 1862. So even though you get, you know, the cow grizzlies and the bear and the state flag and Grizzly Peak and all that, there hasn't been a grizzly. The California grizzlies have been extinct for over a century now. And then, you know, after smallpox and the missions emptied the villages, the gold rush led to state-sanctioned genocide, which decimated the indigenous population. And it dropped their population to 90% from their peak of 25,000. So by the 1880s, there were only a few thousand left. On top of the Shell Mound, they kind of leveled the top, and then they built an amusement park, a bowling alley, a racetrack, and a dance hall. So they were literally dancing on graves there. And then, you know, Prohibition came around eventually and turned Emeryville's debauchery underground, so to speak. Zoe, I think there's a few images of different artifacts that they found when they started demolition in 1902. So excavation started in 1902, which actually was the first example of, yeah, there you go, archaeological. That's maybe not the best one, but there's a few others that should be higher res. It was the first example of archaeological stratigraphy, so they knew that you could look back through geological time and find different strata, but they hadn't quite put that together for indigenous sites. And within these shell mounds, not all of these artifacts were found in this shell mound, but they would find things like tools, pottery, charm stones, quartz crystals that were used as drills, musical instruments like bird bone whistles, and I believe at this one they found a sea otter penis bone, likely used as an awl, you know, for tearing holes in leather. They found in the West Berkeley Shell Mound, which I'll talk about a little bit later, they found a condor burial, which goes to show how important the condor was. And they also, you know, little by little they got paved over. But you know, in the first part of the last century, you would still be able to sort of find shell mounds around. They kind of gave off a bluish tinge from all the shells in there. And then also apparently there were buckeye groves that would spot up near there, because part of the creation myths involving fire had to do with keeping the fire in the buckeye pod. So aside from condor burials, as I said before, they also found human remains. And in this very shell mound, they found 700 Ohlone funerals, full funerals, not just cremated. Most of these remains were sent to UC Berkeley. And then the pieces that were smaller or not, scientifically significant, quote unquote, were ground up, and they were used to make this neighborhood's roads and sidewalks, the ones that we are still stomping on today. After that, and I don't want to just gloss over that. That's a big deal for the indigenous community today, that their ancestors are in the cement here. They also, so after they flattened the shell mound, they built a pigment plant. And there was an industrial paint plant on the land here from 1924 to 1999, including paint that poisoned and changed the colors of this creek. To the point that when the plant was demolished in 99, and they realized that there was still 8 feet of undestroyed shell mound present underneath, which still exists. There were also several hundred bodies still. There were at least 100 in the parking lot behind the Victoria's Secret, which is over there behind the P.F. Chang's and the Banana Republic. And after almost a century of these of this paint factory, the ground there was so toxic and the bodies were so toxic that they weren't even able to repatriate the remains. They had to incinerate them because they couldn't be reburied here. There are a few that were reburied here in an undisclosed location, but most of them had to be burned up. They built a mall here, obviously. They're doing some construction over there. I can't tell if you can tell. I assume that it's, from the look of it, it looks like it's just these stairs going up here. But presumably anything that happens underground, they need to have an Ohlone representative and an archaeologist, and have to stop anytime they find anything remotely artifactual or like a human remain. But even though there was widespread opposition to building this mall, they threw in this little shell mound. There's a little representation of an Ohlone basket to do as sort of as a PR appeasement. Let's see. I'll just bring us up to the present day. Zoe, you probably have some photos of Karina Gould at the Black Friday protests. Every Friday after Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving morning, a lot of indigenous communities meet on Alcatraz Island for an alternative Thanksgiving sunrise ceremony, which is beautiful. I've been there about a decade in a row. And then here on Black Friday, the big shopping day, they come and do a major protest. And they have turned so the Ohlone are still not federally recognized, but they number many thousand, along with multiple diverse tribes who've made the modern Bay Area their home. And a lot of their attention has turned to the West Berkeley Shell Mound. Yeah, that's it. Where they believe there was a shell mound that was even older than this one, 5,700 years old. And there's been a great community growing up out of the fight to keep that. It's in the Spenger's Grotto parking lot. And just in October 2019, there was a judge that ruled against the developers and for the Confederated Villages of Lijon. Lijon is the creek. It's currently named San Leandro Creek, but it's the location of Planting Justice and the Sogorea Land Trust, which are some examples of Ohlone community members reclaiming the land that was once theirs. And there are ways that we can support that, including the Shumi Land Trust. It's a land tax, which people who occupy, either by living or working on the land here, you can probably come back to me, I guess. Yeah. We're able to pay to support the Ohlone and their land reclamation efforts. There's also ways to support that West Berkeley Shell Mound funds. The last thing I'll say is that there are still places, there's probably 3 or 4 places where shell mounds are still visitable and visible. One is out in Point Pinole. One is out in Fremont, which is an actual park that's been created around the Ohlone Shell Mound there. And on the base of the San Bruno Mountains, sort of near the San Francisco airport, which is the first place that white folks witnessed the bay. They climbed up over that mountain and saw the bay for the first time because they had passed by the Golden Gate Bridge in boats numerous times in the fog without realizing that this huge estuary, which was, of course, ripe for exploitation, existed back here. Constance, did you want to talk about some of the restoration efforts that are going on here today? And then I'm happy to do a little closing about the future. Constance?
Oh, wait, hang on. I'm muted. Oh,
okay,
thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Zoe. All right. So as Josh was saying, there is a lot of cultural restoration happening. There are lots of people fighting to make Ohlone culture a lot more visible than it has been in the past few decades or even the past century. And a lot of really amazing community work being done. And there is also a lot of land restoration happening. Like Elizabeth was saying, about 90 to 95% of the bay wetlands have been filled in the past century for agriculture and industry and housing and airports and shopping centers. And there's a really big push to reclaim and restore and also preserve existing wetlands, because open space along the shoreline makes larger scale restoration efforts a lot more feasible compared to areas that have development all the way up to the shoreline. And an example of this could be hard versus soft flood control barriers. So this marsh here would be considered a soft flood control barrier, kind of like a sponge, versus a hard flood control barrier like a sea wall, which would be more akin to like the rim of a bowl, so something hard. And if we're talking about the Bay Area, if we have a bunch of cities ringing the Bay who decide that building hard seawalls is the way that they are going to take on sea level rise mitigation, those barriers altogether could actually alter the tide and increase water levels in the bay, which could potentially worsen flooding in other areas. So it's really important that all the cities in the bay tackle this problem together, and also, you know, the world beyond as a whole, as we're seeing. Because essentially it's the same as, you know, water sloshing onto a sponge is going to be absorbed and it won't kind of flood out, versus water sloshing over the hard edge of a bowl is just going to spill over to the other side and flood whatever's on the other side. Another interesting thing to think about is essentially flooding underground. And this is a new thing, so I'm not sure what role marshes play in this, but groundwater flooding is something that people have really started to take a close look at. And that means when we've got this sea level rise saturating land further and further inland, you have that salty water making its way into the groundwater. And salt water is heavier, so that might sink below the fresh water, but it'll still increase the groundwater underneath us. And what that could mean is when there's flooding, we could also be dealing with sewage backups as well, and flooding with water coming out of the storm drains. The other issue, oh, what was I just going to say about groundwater? Oh, the other issue is that there can be flooding in upland areas where that hadn't previously been considered a problem. So groundwater flooding is definitely an interesting twist in the issue of sea level rise. So where we're standing right now is not only a state park and a wildlife habitat, it's also flood control, which is pretty amazing. So like I said before, this is a state park that is managed by East Bay Regional Park, and it is the Mclaughlin East Shore State Park. And Zoe, if you could bring up the map of the park, that would be lovely. And this is an 8.5 mile park that runs along the shorelines of Oakley, Emeryville, Berkeley, Albany, and Richmond. And this is a park that has over 1,800 acres of uplands and tidelands, which is pretty incredible. because it's all because of the result of decades of community work. Because this was a park that was not just handed over, these areas of land. This was highly fought over land, highly contested land. There were a lot of business interests who wanted this land filled for any number of reasons: industry, housing, retail. And the major force preventing that development from happening and instead advocating for these areas to remain open space was Save the Bay. And Sylvia Mclaughlin was one of the founders. And so this shoreline park is actually named after her. And Save the Bay has a huge impact on the bay that we see today, because it was founded in 1961 when the bay was mostly used for shipping as well as disposing of sewage and garbage. So it smelled really bad, and it was also a lot smaller because there was a lot more area filled in that was built upon or used as landfill. And so the issue of this is, you know, the people wanted to fill in the bay more and more and more. For example, Berkeley wanted to expand the city limits by about 2,000 acres by filling in the bay. And there were a number of other cities and businesses around here who were really, really interested in that as well. And Save the Bay started advocating to keep it open because these bay tidelands and shallow areas are really important nurseries, like we were talking about before. And if you fill in the bay, it destroys these tidelands, which are essentially the bread baskets and the ecosystem that feed the fish to sustain the commercial and sport fishing industries around here. So if you destroy these tidelands and these mudflats and all the eel grass beds, then you turn the remaining waters into what is essentially a desert, biologically speaking. And the other, a great documentary on Save the Bay. Great, thank you. From Bay Area Green Tours. The other wild thing is that filling in the bay will actually change the temperature locally as well, because you've got the cities along the bay getting cooled by the breezes off the water. So filling would actually result in hotter summers and changes in the local climates, which is also a really interesting thing to think about. Oh yeah, we're getting to that one in just a second. That's our present day graph. So because of Save the Bay, the San Francisco Bay is now 40,000 acres larger than it was in 1961, which is totally incredible. So it really speaks to what can happen when communities work together, because this was not an individual effort. It was a number of different environmental groups that were working together along with communities and politicians. And Sylvia Mclaughlin was a major advocate, and she was kind of a rabble-rouser as well. And she also helped establish the Bay Conservation Development Commission, which is the first coastal protection agency in the United States, and they regulate filling the bay and shoreline development. And this has since turned into a worldwide model that people use for coastal management. So like I was saying, large-scale efforts like these are really needed to mitigate all of the issues that we're facing through climate change. It's not just going to happen because we bring our reusable grocery bags to the store, although I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but large scale things need to happen. And that brings me to that graph that we got to take a glance at. So since shelter in place has been happening, you might have been hearing about global emissions dropping. And it's estimated that there's going to be approximately an 8% drop worldwide of carbon emissions because of coronavirus. And we've got this global energy related emissions graph here. So up top are that line at the very top are the energy related emissions globally. And then that bottom is the projected annual change for 2020. So you can see there's been positive change for a number of years with some negative, but that red line is dropping down into something pretty significant. So we've got this 8% theoretically that's going to happen by the end of 2020, which is great because the Paris Accord is 7.6 as far as an annual decrease of global emissions. However, we would have to keep this up for the next 10 years in order to really kind of start moving out of the red zone. So there's a lot of talk about how if we're not prioritizing clean energy right now, if we're saying that all bets are off and everything can come roaring back, so every type of economy and industry can be, pre-coronavirus levels, there is a concern that all the energy emissions will just shoot up even past where we were before once shelter in place is lifted. So it's interesting. You know, this is obviously not something that is sustainable. There are a lot of people suffering because of everything that's been happening with the virus. But we are getting some very interesting information, and it is something worth looking at as far as how much emissions have been dropping. And there was an analogy made by an environmental sciences professor at Stanford saying that this drop is as if magically a third of the cars on the road were suddenly electric. And granted, that's kind of a flippant analogy just because that does not account for the manufacturing of all of those brand new electric cars. But, you know, nonetheless, this is providing useful insights into all this. And so as far as what's happening now, there are some really interesting things happening in the Bay as far as climate mitigation and sea level rise mitigation. And I'm just going to talk about one of them that I find pretty cool to look at and very Sanctuary Institute Adaptation Atlas, which you can get for free online. And this is their page for the East Bay Crescent, which is right where we are. And so I don't know if folks can see, you can see Temescal Creek on there. And it's kind of like it's like the bottom eighth of that map. And so what the Adaptation Atlas is they've divided the bay into 30 different land units based on ecological similarities and not bureaucratic jurisdictions. And what they've done is look at what's there and what different measures can be taken based on the type of adaptation or restoration that might already be happening based on engineering or natural structures, and also the different policy and financial and regulatory approaches that can be taken based on the place. And so it's really cool because it is a watershed-based approach, bringing us back to how it is all fits together, and we can't tackle these problems individually. And the other really cool thing about this map is they do have the current eel grass beds on here as well in the kind of the green hash. And so you can see right where the Emeryville Crescent is, that where it just pops right out after Temescal Creek. There's quite a lot of eelgrass around here as well, according to this map, which is great. So there's a lot going on, and you know, the future is unwritten. And I'm gonna hand it back over to Josh to talk a little bit about just that. What can we expect, Josh?
Oh,
Tell us.
I don't know about if I have expectations, because we're all sitting in kind of radical uncertainty right now. But I do want to thank you, Constance, because I think the really specific, you know, what can we do in our neighborhood, as Elizabeth says, in our watershedhood, waterhood. That makes a big difference for folks being able to feel like they can make a difference, that they can affect change, that they are not just being swept over by forces that are out of any of our control, though that is also part of what's happening. I think just returning back to the Ohlone and the ways that they were able to live on this land for, you know, many thousands of years, many multiple generations. They didn't try to impose their will on the land or the beings. They didn't buy into the myth of separation that we have. They listened and they learned and they tried to live lightly. And so, you know, as things shift dramatically, because they are shifting dramatically, you know, no matter what, we're going to have to be adapting and transforming along with our watersheds and along with our landscapes, our food sheds, all the sort of fundamental things that keep us alive here. We can also, I think one of the things that's special and extra potent about this moment that we're living in right now is that there's all these multiple futures that converge in the choices that we make right now, in all the little and big ripples that we can cast out, based on what we choose to do right now, in this moment, this year, you know, this next couple of years. So I wanted to thank all of you for showing up for this today, for caring so much about your local you know, what keeps you alive here, your water and your neighborhood. And we're going to keep doing work like this. And the more that we have solidarity with, you know, with shared, you know, shared values, not just with, you know, people that look like us, but, you know, expanding out who we include in our considerations of care, the more we can actually imagine a livable future and getting through this together. So yeah, that's all I wanted to offer. Elizabeth, did you want to say more? And I'm sure we could open up for questions if that seems like the right time to do that.
Yeah, I just wanted to, one thing we didn't mention, but Zoe, I think you have some pictures I'm going to talk about just for a second, because I'm an artist in addition to being an ecologist and naturalist. I really want to talk about the really awesome period where there was art out here on the mud
Oh
flats.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so Zoe, I think I've got 3 or 4 or 5 pictures. Thanks for whoever just put up that that link to the Segurite. That's awesome. So it is really cool. In a way, like many other things that this particular watershed is so well known for, another thing is that this is in a way where the birth of using recycled materials for art, it's one of the birth grounds for that. Look at that great dragon right there. And this all started by people who were really sick of how polluted the bay had become and all the trash on this part of the bay. And so a professor, you know, tried it out elsewhere in the Bay Area, and one of his students loved the idea and working on it so much that he started it up here in the mud flats. And so they just used material, all the material and crap and junk. You know, now it's all plastic. I'm not even sure we can make art out of it. It'd fall apart in a half a second. But so this was all happening around, I think the first one was erected in 1962. And it actually received national attention in 1964. And then all through the 60s and 70s, there were anonymous, usually amateur artists that would come here and put in all sorts of different art. And then it got, I think the last one was removed in 1997, in part because of the ecosystem restoration. Now, it's always interesting, you know, the kind of dueling interests in any one location. And, you know, here, thinking about that there was beautiful, cool art here for a while that supplanted the horrible conditions of the, like when the paint plant was here and all of that, that supplanted the beautiful village. Oh yeah, I wanted, do I have it? I'm gonna read you one thing that I read about the Ohlone when they were living here before the white folks came. And one person wrote, oh, I didn't bring it. Sorry, I don't have it. But it was about how the Ohlone basically just lived in the water along the shoreline because there was so much life here. You know, the amount of shellfish, you think about that Shell Mound and the amount of shellfish that was here in the bay at the time that, you know, they drank out of those creeks, right? They're drinking out of the Temazcal Creek and fishing and eating food right out of the bay. And here I am sitting and looking at the bay right now and look, what's out here? Well, there's a bunch of seagulls. There's a couple of Canadian geese. Last week when Constance and I scouted this area, we walked by a bunch of nesting Canadian geese. Now there's no Canadian geese sitting on nests, which means that they've already completed that cycle. We've been looking for the little ones out here. I don't see any, but that's it. You know, at one point, this bay was covered and full of life, you know, and here we are looking out onto, you know, in a way compared to what was there, I think Constance said this, or Joshua, kind of a desert compared to what was here before. And the idea that we could have any small piece, and in other live streams, we'll get into the specific species that are living along the coastline and take a look and really get into the natural history more. But in this session, we really wanted to give you the big picture by using this creek, and in thanks to the Ohlone for even the opportunity to live here. I don't know how you all feel, but I happen to live just not even a mile up from here. I'm right near 59th and San Pablo. And I come to the bay 4 or 5 times a week with my dog. And I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the world. And still, I cry a lot thinking about what it was like before. And this is the whole reason we're doing these, is to make people aware, not make people, to allow more information to be shared. And so hope that this will result in actual actions, you know, where you contribute to organizations or volunteer for organizations that are doing restoration, and understanding how important it is to the bay ecosystem, you know, our waterhood neighbors, our watershed neighbors in our waterhood, as well as to us humans. But as one of, I forget, 8 billion species on the planet, I think we really need to step back and take our place, take our proper place again, and remember where we were before, in balance and in knowledge. We knew the language of the birds. We knew the we could read the landscape. You could walk through and know a fox has just been through here an hour before, and we've lost all of that. And so hopefully through these live streams, what we'll do is reconnect you to your neighborhood, your ecosystem, where you live and where our sustenance should come from and could come from again in a much more localized way. I really love how COVID has localized us in such an extreme fashion. So extreme that we're just in our neighborhoods, we're just in our blocks, we're just here at the mud flat, and I'm not, you know, 300 miles away camping somewhere like I had planned to be, you know. Here I am, local, getting to know. And so I have on iNaturalist, which I use a lot to get to know my neighborhood, my waterhood. I've got a neighborhood project just in like 8 blocks around me. Every day I take pictures where I live, I upload them to iNaturalist. Yesterday I learned like 8 new plants, 3 new insects, just walking around my neighborhood. So there's so many ways that you can get involved today. You don't even have to leave your house. Just go to your backyard, find a couple of bugs, take a picture, and you'll know your neighbors better. So hopefully, as we build this map, and even before that, and Joshua, I think, has a creek walk on his site, watershed witness tours that you should look at. I'm pretty sure Temescal Creek is one of the places where he does tours. So that's another way to learn. But we'll be building a map that'll help you walk this creek and at least 3 other creeks that we're starting with, Saucel, Strawberry, and Peralta. And over the next bunch of months, we'll be doing walks with you guys, hopefully over and over, to help you really get to know your waterhoods. Do you, Constance or Joshua or Zoe, do you guys have anything else you'd like to add? And if not, we're happy to answer questions.
I think I'm good. I'm happy to answer questions if there are any.
Sure. I'm happy to answer questions. I'll also say I do still have some McCullamy and Twillamy campgrounds booked for July and August. So if those are still doable, folks are welcome to join to get to know the larger Sierra and Bay Area creek sheds. But yeah, I'm happy to, let me mute because there's a helicopter going over. But happy to answer any questions.
All right, I'm just gonna say one more thing. Here's my challenge to all of you to answer these questions. What watershed do you live in? What watershed do you work in? What watershed, or better, if you're living in the Bay Area, and a lot of you are living in the East Bay or in San Francisco, what water are you made of? What's the watershed that is coming out of your tap? What river is that? There's a river coming out of your tap in the East Bay, another different river coming out of your tap in San Francisco. And then find out how much water do I use every day. When I first started, I found out I used 125 gallons per person per day. Now we're down to 17 gallons per person per day. So I know my river and I fell in love with it, so I want to protect it and use as little as possible. Okay, that's the last, I hope, of my lectures. So are there questions?
Yes, I have one.
Hi, Gabe.
Hey, Elizabeth, I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, my question is that now with COVID, it's like a freeze frame, right? It's a freeze frame of where we could be theoretically, right, without when fossil fuels like out of the picture. So are people taking advantage of that? I mean, what has anybody like launched research projects or whatever, like what's going on, what's being studied right now, who's taking advantage of this right now, so that who's optimizing this opportunity right now?
Constance, do you want to talk about that?
That's a great question. I actually am not 100% sure about specific organizations. I do know, I think it's Carbon Watch, I believe that's the organization, does have a lot of information on their website. And that seems to be the source that like a lot of news outlets were linking to in the different articles that I was reading. So I'm sure there's a lot going on that just hasn't necessarily been published in a way that's easily findable. But yeah, I certainly, I do not doubt that there are things going on. But yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. Elizabeth or Joshua, do you have more specifics, or Zoe, about groups or projects?
One thing is that there's a Facebook page for those that are interested, Community and Citizen Science California. And there are, in fact, a number of citizen science projects that are related to tracking what's going on during COVID on a number of fronts. And I know I've posted one or two on there, but I'll also look around, and if I can find anything, I'll include it in our follow-up email. It's a great question, Gabe. Thanks for asking it.
Thank you very much.
Gabe's in LA, by the way. He's visiting us from LA. Thanks for visiting our watershed, Gabe.
I love it. It's beautiful. It's you know, it's heartbreaking too, you know, like about the Ohlone and all that stuff. I'm deeply moved. So thank you for that.
Yeah, well, you're an artist. Do something. Are there other questions?
I had seen a question in the comments that I don't know if it got answered. Somebody was asking about books that we could recommend. One of the books that I really love is called State of Change by Laura Cunningham. And she is an artist that has, she's kind of like an environmental archaeologist in a way. She'll do a ton of research about different areas of land and then paint them and try to recreate them as they might have looked pre-European contact. And she talks a lot about the way the land and climate has changed over time. So that's a great one. And then there's also the California Natural History series book about geology written by Doris Sloan. That's a really great one, just to understand land masses and landforms and, you know, how water flows and where it flows, more about where it flows, just because it has to do with geology and landscape. Gosh, I'm sure there are more, but those are the first two that come to mind. Does anybody else have recommendations?
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'd just suggest Malcolm Margolis's book, The Ohlone Way, is at least it's something that I've been reading and learning a lot from in the last month or so. And Joshua, you had some ideas? Oh, there's also the California Naturalist Handbook. I think it's called the California Naturalist Handbook, and that has so much information. And then there's David Carl, who's actually on our board, has written a lot of the California guides, California Guide to ... water, for instance. He wrote, and he just republished it. So that's another great place to look.
Yeah, I was just going to say the one of the books that has been the most evocative for me about the native peoples here is Dawn of the World, which is by Miriam. I think it came out early in the last century. He went around to a bunch of different coastal and foothill Miwok communities and took down as many stories as he was able to. So you get a real powerful sense of some of the relationship with animals and relationship with, there's a witch at the top of Mount Tamalpais and giants and rock beings and all these different ways that they engaged with this kind of magical ensouled landscape. And so that has been very inspiring to read, Dawn of the World. And then there's a lot of, I tend towards eco-spirituality and activism texts. And there's some colleagues that I have that wrote about the spirituality of water in different cultures. Just trying to tune back into that sort of, we are alive and the earth is alive and the waters are alive, and we're not surrounded by dead inanimate objects that are worthless beyond how they benefit us. We also have the opportunity to be in mutually beneficial relationships. So yeah, there's a lot of good work being done there.
I'm seeing some awesome recommendations in the comments as well, so maybe those can get put in a list in the follow-up email also, hopefully.
Wow, that is an awesome amount of, you guys are so great. Thanks everybody for making all these recommendations. I always feel like I love doing this whole Zoom thing because I feel like probably there were a number of people on this call who could have given huge sections of this tour. There's so many people that know things. So thanks for sharing what you know in the comments. It's really helpful. And send us any more information you want us to include in things that you know about, and hopefully we'll see you on future live streams. So I want to thank Zoe especially for being the hardcore tech manager and getting all the pictures up and doing all that. Thanks for doing like the desk job while we all get to be outside in these beautiful spots. And also, I really, really want to say thank you to Constance and to Joshua for just like 100% jumping in. We're launching this thing. I sent Zoe the project description like a week after we had started this whole thing because we're just running to do it. So I really want to thank Constance and Joshua, and they both put in a ton of time to learn more and to organize this stuff so it was a kind of coherent presentation. So thanks to everybody who put in a bunch of time. And I love that you guys joined us. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for coming. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for coming, everybody.
Thanks, guys. See you at the next one. Be well, everyone.
See you
Take
soon.
good care.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Love your water hood. Love your water hood. Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, Elizabeth.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.